What is up, everybody? Welcome back to our Top 25 series. Today's a special one for me as a Michigan fan, as a guy that was at the Rose Bowl last year, got to see my team win it all. Top 25. We're going number 9, Michigan Wolverines. We're going to be breaking down their entire roster, losses from last year, transfers coming in, defense, offense, impact players, recruiting class, and their schedule over under. We're going to be doing it all. That's what we do here on these Top 25 series. And today we're talking Michigan. They are number 9 in the athletics AP poll. Now, let's talk about last year. I can talk about last year forever, but Christian won't let me. But 15-0 last year, won the national title. Jim Harbaugh obviously went out on top. They do have a new coach in Sharon Moore, who was their offensive coordinator. They do have a new defensive coordinator, too, as Martindale. So they got some new pieces this year. But last year, I mean, what can we say about this team? They were one of the best teams in college football, and they proved it down the stretch. Beating Ohio State for a third straight year was fantastic for the Michigan program. J.J. McCarthy was very efficient, 22 touchdowns, almost 3,000 yards passing. Obviously, Blake Corum. I mean, 27 touchdowns is absolutely ridiculous. Blake Corum, 1,200 yards. Donovan Edwards came on. Obviously, in the playoff, we saw that, especially in the national title game. He's going to be a big piece of this puzzle for them this year. But, I mean, what else are you going to say? They went undefeated. They beat Ohio State again. They beat Alabama when, people were mocking them for not wanting to play Alabama because of how they acted when they saw who they were matched up. That was a great game, one of the better games that I've seen in college football as they're live. And then they won a national title. So, really, everybody keeps saying this is a rebuilding year for Michigan. So we're going to talk about that. This is a 2024 squad. They did lose a lot on the offensive side. So when you look at that, they have to replace the starting quarterback, their starting running back, entire offensive line, and the two most productive receivers. Really, when you're looking at it from that perspective, that's what they were replacing on an offense that was very efficient last year. You saw points per game. They were top 15. Rushing statistics, they were pretty good in terms of that top 25 there. We saw the touchdowns there. Passing statistics, they're never really that great in terms of what they were trying to do. You're not going to see the big numbers, but they were efficient. I mean, McCarthy was efficient enough to win a national title, so it's there. But a lot of changes on this offense that they're going to have to figure out some kinks early on, and pretty quick because they got Texas coming up.
Yeah, I mean, the number one thing, Miles Hinton at left tackle, I think you're feeling really solid there. When you saw some of these pieces on the offensive line get some snaps last year, they weren't always the best. So I think obviously some growth as they gel together. I think that's pretty critical, especially with an inexperienced quarterback back there. Potentially, that's the thing. There's such a big quarterback battle here that it's really tough to talk about this offense. I personally would favor Alex Orji. I think that he's got a ton of upside as a dual threat type of guy, but kid has a lot of arm talent. Going to Jack Tuttle, I think, is the safer way to do it. And maybe with this defense, that's what they do. As we get into the defense, we'll talk about why that could be beneficial to them. But you still have Colston Loveland. You still have Donovan Edwards, who, I'm not a huge fan of Donovan Edwards. I think that he largely goes through an entire season, and he was clearly the number 2 behind Blake Corum, and rightfully so. Corum's one of the best running backs in program history, but then in the big games, Donovan Edwards really stepped up. I like the depth behind him as well. I really like Khalil Mullings. I think you're going to be able to put together some type of rushing attack. And now you have more of an aspect of that. J.J. McCarthy could certainly be a running quarterback last year, but Orji brings a different dynamic to that. So while there's some question marks at the wide receiver position and really in the running back room, I still think that this offense should be able to move the ball efficiently enough to at least, keep themselves in games. That defense is certainly going to do its part. But really, I think this offense is going to run through Colston Loveland for the most part as far as a passing attack goes.
Colston Loveland is the best tight end in college football. I'm just going to lay it out there. The bias in me. I think he is. I think he's right there. And yeah, that definitely is going to be, I think for any quarterback that starts, Colston Loveland's their blanket. That's their safety guy. That's the guy they're going to go to and lean on. And I did a big video on the quarterback room if you want to go in depth on the guys there. And really, that's not really a depth chart over there, because even Sharon Moore, the new head coach over there, he talked about it at the Big Ten, media days, like, he kind of dodged the question. Who's the starter? He is like, they're all in there. And it really, Orji, Tuttle, Warren, I think are all right there. Like, you could flip Warren for Orji. You could flip any of those 3 guys, and they're there. I think Orgy, like I said, I think he brings the highest ceiling. When I did the video, I think from an offensive perspective, what he can bring to the table. Whereas I think Warren and Tuttle, they're very solid. And maybe you're looking at it from like, maybe we have packages with Orgy, but we have this as our starter that can maybe not turn the ball over because that defense is going to be there. I think my biggest question mark is that offensive line. How fast do they gel? How quick do they gel together? What does that look like? Because they got some big games early on in the year and even obviously in the Big Ten. But Samad Morgan as well. Like, what is he going to be moving forward as that playmaking guy? I like Tyler Morris as well. We've been waiting for a Michigan wide receiver to really step up in college. We've seen guys, Cornelius Johnson. We've had guys there that can definitely just play. Morgan brings a different kind of like just swagger to this team, though. He's that guy that can definitely be that playmaker in that offense that they're definitely going to need going forward. Now, we talked about this. They got a lot of losses, notable losses on the board, and really it's almost impossible to replace these guys. Like, they're going to be able to step in. I think AJ, obviously you have Loveland there. Offensive line to me is the huge. That's why they were so good last year. They had the best. They should have won best offensive line again over Washington last year. That's how good they were. And then Blake Corum was that guy. Like, he's just a leader for them. He was the guy they can depend on. He was the guy that can give 30 carries if they needed a game like against Illinois a couple years ago. If they needed, a touchdown in the red zone, that was their guy. And then JJ, he has his faults, and I got frustrated with him at times, but he was at least that solidified piece there. And when you don't have a quarterback one, when you really don't have one, you get a little nervous. Like, when we're looking at that list and like, oh, who's our QB1? We're recording this on July 30th. Who's that guy for? If you don't know yet who that guy is, I think you're a little nervous as a fan base.
For sure, and maybe they do know internally, but replacing J.J. McCarthy, a first-round draft pick, is really tough to do for most programs, and Michigan hasn't really been a staple of, bringing guys in, developing them. We saw Cade McNamara start over J.J. McCarthy, which I think helped J.J. McCarthy in the long run, but I wonder if it's something similar to that McNamara-McCarthy freshman year when McCarthy had those packages, like you said, and maybe that's the Orgy role this year, and then they turn it over to him maybe next year. But man, as I look down this list, I feel like Zach Zinter might actually be, Blake Corum and JJ McCarthy, of course, but outside of that, I think Zach Zinter is one of the biggest losses on this team. You talk about leadership with Blake Corum. Zinter played a lot of snaps for that team, and he really set the tone for them. So I am curious to see how this offensive line works. The good thing, when you have Donovan Edwards, it doesn't matter if the offensive line's good. He's not hitting the hole anyway, so he can just bounce it outside more, and it'll be okay this year, and it'll be beneficial for them.
Man, the shade. I can't let that go. Come on, Donovan. We got to get that vision back up. So I don't hear that all season. You know what? Recruiting wise, they've always done a very good job of getting their guys. Like, and they get the shots taken out by Ohio State and their players and say, oh, we are the 5-star guys. But the last 3 years, it hasn't worked out that way. They do a great job of developing. And I think that when you look at this class, Moore did a very good job of keeping guys that he needed to, top 20 overall. So they 19 overall, composite was 16, and 58 transfer portal. They don't really address them transfer portal very much based on their lack, I don't know, want to say lack of NIL, but also their academic standards. It is harder for transfers to get into Michigan based on that academic standards there. But they did a good job. They addressed the tackle spot. They're always going to get offensive line. Blake Frazier, Andrew Sprague, those guys are big boys ready to go. Obviously, Jaden Davis is, I think, the wild card there. There are some people divided on him in terms of the Michigan boards I'm on. I know on my message boards, I'm way too old for that, but there's guys that like talking about him like, hey, we should have went after someone bigger. We should have went after there, but he's a pretty complete guy. He reminds me a lot of Dante Moore, like he was in high school. Very polished, very veteran type guy. Been in, played a lot of football in high school, and he's not ready yet, but he can be. He can be that guy. Jordan Marshall in that running back room is good. They win guy Hogan Hansen. Like this group, like even Brady Prescorn, the tight end, like they've talked about Brady as being kind of maybe a piece in there. Just what they do. Like I know they like Shannon Goodwin, Amarian Stewart, and those guys. They did a good job of just filling needs.
Yeah, I really like Jordan Marshall. I think that, as the season wears down, I think that Marshall could potentially have a role in that backfield despite having a lot of depth there. But like you mentioned, it comes down to development. Michigan is notorious for getting a ton of 4 stars and even 3 stars. And really for a lot of years, that didn't always work out, especially in that game against Ohio State. It's worked out. Now, if Sharon Moore can keep that culture of development going, that's my big question here. The fact that he was able to keep a lot of these recruits committed, though, is a positive. You don't normally see that when there's a coaching change. So I think that we're on a good start for for recruits this year, and we'll see. But I think this group is as good as any as we're going to talk about in the rest of the top 10, outside of maybe, Georgia, Ohio State, Alabama. I think this is the next tier down, and they're doing a good job here.
Yeah, and not this isn't a 25 show, but right now he's at a top 15 class in the 25 class. So he's done a good job. He's got to prove it on the field. Moore's going to prove it on the field. That's where it's going to be. But he's done a good job of solidifying that base and kind of bringing it in there. And yeah, you know what? I'm going to take another shot at Ohio State because that's my job as a Michigan fan. Jordan Marshall was getting a ton of buzz when he was rumored to go to Ohio State, and then all of a sudden he goes Michigan, and everybody just like, oh yeah, he's okay. I'm like, no, that's crap. Like he is a player in that room, and like it would not shock me to see Jordan Marshall next year being a legitimate threat in that room with Donovan Edwards going. As far as transfers go, they don't really go get guys in the transfer. They usually use it for their offensive line. They will go after like Josh Prevey, CJ Charleston, Dominic Zvada, kicker out there. They go after kind of that offensive line. They go after there, but not a ton on the offensive side.
Yeah, for sure. I do want to go back really quick to Jordan Marshall. I have him ranked ahead of James Peoples, the Ohio State commit. So, I just want to show I have a little bit of Michigan bias here as well. But no, this is, they don't really hit the portal that much. And
No.
maybe that's something that they introduce in the
Maybe.
future. But like you said, it's kind of tough to get into Michigan, and they haven't needed that. They develop really well. So fine transfer class here.
The one area they do go after in the portal is offensive line. So they've always done a good job. Like 2 years ago, they go in Stanford. They try to go get guys that they realize can kind of have that impact. They've always done that really well. And so that's something to know too, how they use the portal. They're very like, hey, yeah, we're going to get 3 guys. We're going to get 3 guys that we need. Like we really do that. And Charles is an interesting kid too. Smaller school guy coming over there at Michigan. It's going to be interesting how he kind of pops out there. But from an offensive perspective, impact players, if Orji starts, if he gets that nod, he's going to be an impact player. Now, he's going to throw some crap away too, and there's going to be some nervous fans out there because he lets it fly, and I do think that he can make some mistakes there. Donovan Edwards as well. Samaj Morgan I put on here. To me, it's Colston Loveland. He's going to be their best player, in my opinion, there. And Donovan's got a show from 2 years ago. Last year was a down year for him at times. Like, I think that, yes, they landed the break, but 2 years ago, the big thing I want to see from Edwards is his receiving ability. If they can bring that back, if they, I know he had a broken hand a couple years ago. I understand that last year was one of those things, but if they can get him back as a receiver and he can really make an impact there, especially with Mullings and these other guys in that running back room kind of taking up some volume there, I think that opens up this Michigan offense the most.
Yeah, I mean, even going back to camp last year, at times I want to say I remember reports of Donovan Edwards lining up in the slot. So that's how they feel about him as a receiver when healthy. And I think that introduces a whole different dynamic to this offense too, because it wasn't really a main piece of that offense last year. I'm glad you put Samaj Morgan on here. I didn't mention him too much, but I am a huge fan of Samaj Morgan. I think him and Tyler Morris are really good. So I'm curious to see how we need to see if a quarterback can get him the ball first, but I'm excited to see it. But really the impact players to me too are the 5 offensive linemen because of how that team has been constructed. I'm curious to see if that becomes a problem for them or if it returns to being a strength. If all else fails, Colston Loveland's there and he's going to make plays, and we know that. So that's good.
Yeah, and then let's talk about the real stars of the show here. This defense is still good. Like last year, obviously, number 1 in opponent points per game. They only gave up 10 points per game last year. Opponent yards per game, they were number 1. They only gave up 247 combined yards. And from some of the teams that we've talked about in this series, that's ridiculous. Like we're talking like that is just special type of defense that they had. Opponent points per play, 0.173. That's how good they were last year. Number 1 in the nation last year. From a Michigan defense on the rushing side, opponent yards per rush, 7th. They were top 10 in basically every metric on a defensive rush standpoint. And in passing defense, they were still really good there. They were top 25 unit. Not as good from a rush defense perspective, but they got that guy, Will Johnson. He's pretty good out there. Obviously, they lost Jesse Mentor. And when you're looking at it just from that perspective, bringing in Don Martindale, who really kind of, when you look at it, he's got that disguise heavy defense that they really had at Michigan in 2021. He's kind of the architect of that. So, like, it's not a complete scheme change. This is really what they run anyway. So it has there. And they bring back a ton of guys. They have a ton of guys on this list out there. What do we think about this defense?
When you have two of the top 5 defensive tackles in the nation, I think
Pretty good.
your down 3 linemen are gonna be pretty good.
Yeah.
Mason Graham is a top 5 player in the country. Will Johnson is also probably a top 5 or 10 player in the country, both probably top at their position. When you have 2 levels where you can say that, the defense's ceiling is massive. Will Johnson, incredible ball skills, but really just a shut down blanket type of corner where I think every team is going to avoid him the way that they were avoiding him last year. And then you just look across the board. It's just guys that, they return a ton, but also some of these new guys that are stepping in are talented and
Yeah.
they've been developed inside this Michigan defense. So I think the upside for this unit makes it easier to say, well, even if the offense struggles, I think Michigan can get through that, especially as we get into their schedule. Like there's a lot of favorable stuff there, but man, Mason, I'm the biggest Mason Graham fan. I think that this kid has a chance to. I think I put him as my number one, like first overall pick in one of my mock drafts that I've done, because he's that talented. He's very, very good. So, and Kenneth Grant's no slouch either. So this
Yeah.
team should be as dominant on defense as they were last year, in my opinion.
Let's put it this way: Kenneth Grant and Mason Graham, I think, are two of the best defensive linemen in the Big Ten. Like I would put those two up against anybody. And when you get that type of pressure up front, then you have Josiah Stewart, Derek Warren, these guys, and Will Johnson be able to cover. And they did have to address kind of the secondary a little bit. They got guys out there that are going to go after the football, and they're definitely going to do that. And the one area, and we'll talk about in the transfers, their linebackers are deeper than they've been in a long time. They usually have those linebackers, but the depth isn't there. Where I would argue like their edge guys, they have less depth now. But when you're looking at their linebackers, you're like, man, they brought in some guys. Ernest Hosman from Nebraska, Barham from Maryland. They brought these guys in to kind of shore that up. And they're good. I mean, they did lose some guys though. So when we're talking about notable losses and we kind of go over, what that looks like, it's not – when you're talking about it, Chris Jenkins, one of my favorite. Mike Sanderstill is one of my favorite Michigan players ever. That dude did it all. I mean, he is special, and you saw his draft stock go up because NFL teams coveted what he did. There's a reason why he got drafted where he got drafted. Junior Colson, Michael Barrett, Keon Saab obviously transferred. Samaj Bridgman obviously transferred as well. They did lose a couple to the transfer portal, but guys, like, and yes, but that culture they built, like, remember when they lost Aiden Hutchinson and we back up. Well, this is what we do. That's what they kind of do, and they build it up. But they did lose some notable pieces there.
Yeah, the 2 linebackers that they're losing were huge for them in that defense last year. Sainristil was one of the more impactful corners in the country. Every time I popped on that film, I was like, oh, yeah, he is a perfect Harbaugh player, where he just goes 100 every single snap. And that's why this defense was so good. They rallied to the ball really well. I think they've got the pieces in the secondary to do the same thing and kind of make up for that. And like you talked about, that linebacker depth is better. Even with losing Colson and Barrett in the middle there, I think that these losses are very notable. And like I said, when we get into all of these teams in the top 10, that's how it's going to be. But these teams are in the top 10 because they can replace these guys with development and with recruiting. So I think they're in okay shape.
Yeah, I mean, when you're looking at it from that perspective, Colson, so basically the 4 leading tackle on this team last year, Colson had 95, Barrett had 65, Hosman's back, he had 46, but then Mike Sanderstill had 44, plus 6 interceptions, and 6 pass deflections, 2 forced fumbles. Dude was everywhere. So that is a piece that, and I don't think that his leadership can be that's something that is going to have to figure it out. There's going to be other group of people in that room. They're going to have to fill that giant hole because he was by far the leader of that defense in terms of just that guy. The glue guy did it all. That team absolutely loved him. Now, as far as recruiting wise, they really went after it hard. Josiah Edmond is a lot of fun to watch. He's a guy that, you're looking at that 6'1", 181, number 10 rated cornerback there. Very, very good there. They got 2 edge guys that I think are ready to go. Lugard and Devin there, 6'6", 225, 230. They're going to do that well. Jeremiah Beasley as well. A lot of love out there for Jeremiah Beasley from scouts. But they really attacked it. On the defensive side, this is where I trust when you're looking at, their general manager, Sean Maggie, the guys that they have running stuff there, they attack the defensive side and they do a good job of getting talent.
Yeah, snagging two 6'6", 225 plus edge rushers that can probably rotate in if you need
Pretty
them
good.
to, just based
Yeah.
on body type. That's a solid thing to do. And then, like you mentioned, Beasley, I think might be the gem of this group, honestly. So
Mhm.
obviously needs to put on a little bit of weight, but I think when you look at this class, they'll have to develop a lot of these 3-star guys, but they always do. So I think. Once again, I think their defensive class is a little bit better than their offensive class. And once again, giving credit to Sherrone Moore for keeping this group together and committed. That's a good start to this new era of Michigan football.
Yeah, and Lugard is out there and from Maryland, and you know what you know what his wingspan is? 84 inches. That's his wingspan. And they talk about him. He's a basketball kid that just really started playing football. That dude's ceiling could be very, very high. When you watch that, he actually played wide receiver and D end in high school. So he played both on that side. They think that as soon as he adds that physical transformation, as soon as he gets those that in that weight room, this dude is going to be really, really special. So they address that, and I love that about him. Now, and it's not that they don't go after transfers. So I know I mentioned earlier, like on the offensive side, the defensive side, they definitely went after that, right? So we have, when you're looking at the transfers they brought in, Ricky Johnson, UNLV safety, Jaden Mangham from Michigan State. So shout out going to big brother, not little brother. Wesley Walker as well from Louisville. Amir Hall is an interesting one to me. I really like this kid. And I think he's going to kind of get himself in the rotation there at corner. Amir Walker's coming back. He's probably going to be playing cornerback there. And then Barham as well, coming over from Maryland. So very, very solid pieces in that room.
Yeah, I mean, like you mentioned, we don't hit the portal very hard in Michigan, but when we do, we're filling needs, and that's exactly what they did. So I think this group, they mix in with the talent that they were already developing, and hopefully a couple of impact players can come from this group. I don't think they'll be in trouble if a few guys don't. I'll say that because I think they've got enough depth anyway.
Yeah, no, they did a good job. I mean, when you're looking at it overall, like they filled the needs that they had. And they didn't have a ton of needs on that defensive side, but good. I like that they addressed that secondary. They went after that. That's a really good gift for them when you're talking about that. Now we're talking about impact play. And Will Johnson, I love this kid. He is absolutely phenomenal when you're talking about him from the cornerback spot. I think he could be a top 5 player. When you're looking at him just from just an NFL scouting perspective, what he can do, he's a shutdown corner, and he has that length that you like to see from him. I think he does a great job on the outside. He does press coverage. He can do it all pretty much. I love him in zone. He does those things. This team's going to rally behind Will Johnson. I mean, that's their leader. I mean, that is really where it comes down to. Mason Graham is there, Derek Moore, Josiah Stewart. We could talk about those other guys, but to me, it comes down to Will Johnson. He's their leader. He's their impact player. He's the guy that they're going to rally behind that can lead them there. And I think he's the guy that can win those games against the teams that they need to win. Ohio State, those are the type of impact guys you need.
Yeah, Johnson and Graham, both my top player at their respective positions heading into the 2025 NFL draft. And I think Michigan fans will hope that they don't go to the NFL draft because they'll be underclassmen when they're doing it. But just phenomenal players that I think will set the tone every single game. Very similar to Sanderstill in that they go hard every single play. I think you'd say that about every Michigan player from the last couple of years, but just hope that continues post Harbaugh. I think it will. But those two players, man, I could talk about those two players. I will talk about those two players for the next, 6 months, excitedly too. So.
Yeah, I mean, when you're looking at it overall, you have to really like what they can do. I think all these players, they play hard together. They understand kind of the pieces that they have. And I think the other thing, too, with this Michigan defense, and I understand the new defensive coordinator is going to be there. These are guys that played on a national title team. They're going to bring that in there. And these are guys that I know there's going to be, they always talk about the hangover and they talk about that. But I do think there's a little bit to prove when you're talking about their schedule and talking about Harbaugh not being there anymore. And it's like, hey, we're not just Harbaugh. This is Sherrone Moore's team now. This is us, and we can kind of do that. And over under 9.5 is interesting because I do think they have that rebuild. I think that when you're looking at it, they're thinking of this being that stopgap year. Their schedule is, I was doing the schedule. I was talking to Chris about it. Home, and they got some tough pieces in there, right? Texas, I think that game is there. USC, depending on what USC's offense looks like this year, I think that's going to be interesting. But I do think Michigan's front seven is just going to destroy USC's offensive line. I think that's a big part of that. At Washington would have been a little tougher had DeBoer still been there. At Illinois, I mean, always tough game. Michigan State's kind of going through new coaching, but big games. Oregon, Texas, Ohio State. That's really the three games that are the biggest on there. And when you're looking at the over-under, that's 9-3. I think that's where they get it at. I think that's when you're looking at it like, hey, are they can win those games? But where are you at with this 9.5 number here?
I'm going under with this one, and I
All
hate doing it, but I look at those 3 games that you circled, right? Texas, I think Texas has every shot to win a national title this year. I think that they are a very competitive team. They had a little bit of turnover, but like I think that their talent replacement and the consistency at quarterback is gonna be the differentiator. Same thing, Oregon, I think, has an experienced quarterback at the very least. They can deliver the football. That's going to be a really, really tough game because they match up on both sides in the trench. And then Ohio State, I hate picking Ohio State at this point, just after the last couple of years. But when you look at how much money Ohio State spent to buy their team, I think that they're in better shape this year. So, quite frankly, this looks like a 9-3 team, which is a really solid season when you're losing as many first rounders and top 50, 75 draft picks that you did. 9-3 is a good season, but I do have to hit the under here.
Oh, when are you guys going to learn betting against my Wolverines? No, I understand that viewpoint. The thing that I always come back to, because I go back and forth on this a little bit, Michigan's going to have to do what they used to do. Well, they kind of did it the last couple of years anyway with JJ there. Ground and pound, control the time of possession, and that front seven is going to have to get after the quarterback and just create havoc back there. They can't turn the ball over. I don't think they can afford a bunch of interceptions. I don't think they can afford like turnovers there. Most teams can't, but I think this team especially, I will say this. I'm going to say over because I'm a Michigan homer, and that's just how it goes. I think that if their front seven can really disrupt like Texas's offensive line, which is probably one of the best in the SEC, that's going to be that game. I wish I could have just a recorder at that line of scrimmage in that game because those dudes are going to go after it against each other there. I do think Oregon is interesting there. I will say this. Ohio State bought their team, but they might have bought the wrong quarterback, and they didn't address a ton of their offensive line issues. I still think that that's their one weakness. And I do think that is the one area that Michigan's been able to kind of exploit is that offensive line, defensive line matchup. And that's why, like, obviously I would just love Ryan Day to lose to Michigan again. But I also think that there's something to like, hey, getting after Howard. He didn't look at times. He was going to lose out to Avery Johnson at Kansas State, right? That's why he left. Oh, hey, this offensive line, if they don't stay healthy, how much depth do they really have? And if Michigan's healthy up front in that game 12, I think it's going to be closer than people expect.
For sure. I think there's a shot that Will Howard's not starting by that time,
That's
too.
true. I really want him to be starting, though. Like, I think I'd rather have Will Howard than Julian Sayin.
Yeah, I think that's totally fair. I mean, it could be Devin Brown too, from everything that's coming out of Ohio State. There's like still a 3-way quarterback battle going on over there. It's similar to Michigan, but yeah, I mean, you don't want Ryan Day to lose that game because you want Ryan Day to keep his job because it's been going well for you guys. So,
yeah. So the way I look at this team is they're gonna really have to just adjust to Sherrone Moore now. What is that identity? What is that going to be there? They're recruiting fine. I think that they could still go to the playoff. I think 4 teams can make it in the Big Ten, and I think they can be that 3rd or 4th team, depending on how it kind of plays out, what Penn State looks like, how does Oregon finish. I think, realistically, Oregon, Ohio State are the 2, in my opinion, the 2 top teams in this. But I don't think Michigan – you can't just discredit 3 Big 10 titles in a row national championship. They're going to be there. So if they get in, I do think defensively they can win a lot of games and be there. I'm going to have the over, but that is definitely a homer over. But I do think that they are going to challenge people up front. I love that about the roster.
yeah, I just hope the offense surprises us a little bit. I hope we see maybe something a little bit new too, a little bit interesting dynamic of like let's push the ball downfield a lot more. I don't think it'll happen. Depends on the quarterback, but I can keep my fingers crossed. But it'll still be a fun team to watch. I love trench play. Michigan's given me that for the last decade, so I'm gonna keep watching them happily.
That's why we're going to turn you, Ohio man, into a Michigan fan. That's what's going to happen. You need a college team, so we're gonna slowly convert you over there. So, Michigan fans, let us know what you think. You're my people. So, drop in the comments. What do you think about this team overall? Who do you think should win the starting quarterback job? Where do you think that over/under is at? Are you comfortable taking the over? And then, are we going to beat Ohio State's ass for a 4th year in a row? Let me know in the comments. We appreciate you guys. We'll check you guys on the next one.